It was a wild year for weather in Canada, and as we look back, we need to begin with the last week of 2022 when a historic blizzard affected Ontario and Quebec just as Christmas arrived. Holiday travel was stopped in its tracks, and some people spent Christmas Eve stuck in department stores, including our own storm hunter, Mark Robinson. The frigid air that followed created stunning works of art on Lake Erie courtesy of Mother Nature, but it wasn't such good news for the geese. While many in the east were enjoying an unusually warm winter, it took a toll on Ottawa's famous Rideau Canal. 2023 was the first year the skating rink failed to open due to the lack of ice. A unique challenge would come to Newfoundland in early spring as about a dozen dolphins became stranded in shifting sea ice. Locals made a valiant effort to save as many dolphins as they could in what was an incredibly difficult situation. Spring melt hit Quebec hard when it mixed with days of heavy rain to produce devastating floods. 2 firefighters were swept away by torrents and lost their lives. Dry weather sparked an early start to the forest fire season in Alberta. Ash raining down on the city of Edmonton over the Victoria Day weekend was an eerie precursor to the season to come. 1 week later, flames roared up in Nova Scotia, destroying hundreds of homes and prompting evacuations. It would be Nova Scotia's worst fire season on record. Hardly a week after that, BC was already experiencing the second largest fire in its history, the Donny Creek wildfire. It would go on to become BC's largest wildfire ever recorded. At the same time, lightning strikes caused terrible wildfires in Quebec. The remote fires were captured on satellite imagery, which also showed the incredible amount of smoke that drifted into southern Ontario. Air quality dropped to the worst in the world, and hazy skies that are more common in the west blanketed Toronto to Ottawa. On Canada Day, a massive EF4 tornado struck several homes in Alberta, leaving many of them uninhabitable. It was on the ground for half an hour and was the strongest tornado Alberta had experienced since 1987. Later in July, Calgary experienced an incredible hailstorm when a strong system parked itself over the city. So much hail fell that some areas were compared to ice floes. The Ottawa area took the brunt of storms throughout the summer. On July 13th, 2 tornadoes touched down, followed by more tornado warnings 2 weeks later, and major flooding due to heavy rain 2 weeks after that. Nova Scotia also experienced incredible flooding in July due to training thunderstorms. 4 people were killed after over 250 millimeters of rain fell in 1 day. The lack of rain in BC was a big factor leading to the worst fire season on record, but it came to a head for many in late August when the city of Kelowna was suddenly faced with rapidly advancing flames. 150,000 people were put on evacuation alert. While Kelowna was spared a mass evacuation, Yellowknife was not so lucky. The entire city was evacuated for 3 weeks, a tough situation with only one road in and out of town. In September, Hurricane Lee suddenly jumped from a Category 1 to a Category 5 in a single day, with its sights set on Atlantic Canada. While damage from the storm was minimal, Atlantic Canada found itself in the cone of uncertainty far more often this hurricane season than many southern states on the Gulf of Mexico. The roundup of this past year began with a blizzard and it ends with a blizzard. Nunavut, which is no stranger to frigid, blustery conditions, experienced full blizzard conditions for 3 days straight, claiming 1 life. A winter storm of that intensity was shocking, even for Canada's seasoned north.
I'm so happy to see the snow my first time.
These are the elevators. And this is the front door. Holy sh**!
Thank you, buddy.
Our planet packed plenty of weather extremes this past year. These were the globe's biggest stories. The final days of 2022 saw a historic blizzard sweep across much of North America. Nowhere was hit harder than upstate New York, where 38 deaths made this the deadliest blizzard for the area in 50 years. Early February brought the year's most devastating earthquake to parts of Turkey and Syria. The 7.8 magnitude quake killed more than 50,000 people. A slow-moving winter storm over California in February triggered the first blizzard warning in parts of the Los Angeles area in 30 years. Residents in the nearby San Bernardino Mountains were buried in snow over the next few weeks, preventing many from coming or going to the area for days. Cyclone Freddy was dubbed a zombie storm due to its resurgence that made it the longest-lasting cyclone ever recorded at 37 days. It left a trail of destruction in its wake after ripping through eastern Africa first in late February before circling back in March. The death toll sits at more than 1,000. Wildfires dominated world headlines in 2023, and Greece was hit particularly hard. A blaze broke out on the island of Rhodes in July, with flames spreading to a popular tourist area. Greece said it carried out the largest evacuation ever undertaken in the country. Hazy, smoke-filled skies from raging Canadian wildfires spread south into the U.S. Midwest and East, where millions of Americans were urged to limit indoor activities as the poor air quality made for dangerous conditions. Heat would be another common theme in 2023. Record temperatures were recorded in Vietnam, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, while Japan recorded its hottest summer in 125 years. Temperatures soared as high as 43 degrees Celsius in Madrid, and a region stretching from Spain to Syria experienced heat wave after heat wave. Deadly floods struck Central Africa, where landslides were triggered by excessive rain and entire homes were swept away. Over 500 people lost their lives. At least 3 wildfires on Maui devastated the western side of the island in August, destroying thousands of buildings and killing at least 97 people. Search and rescue teams combed through the ruins of Lahaina, a tourist mecca that was once the capital of the Kingdom of Hawaii. Storm Daniel dumped record rainfall amounts in central Greece before sweeping across to Libya, where thousands died in a huge flash flood. The town of Derna was deluged by water that smashed through 2 catchment dams and swept away a quarter of the coastal town. A tropical cyclone battered and soaked southern Brazil in early September, flooding homes and swelling rivers. But drought was also a huge issue for much of South America in 2023, with the Amazon River hitting its lowest level ever recorded.
Whoa!
Late in the year, tremors linked to volcanic activity prompted the evacuation of an entire town in Iceland. The population of Grindavik, about 4,000 people, waited weeks for an eruption that was said to be imminent. On December 18th, lava began spewing from a fissure 4 kilometers from the town, but residents still didn't know when, if ever, it will be safe to return home.
As 2023 comes to a close, we have the tough task of narrowing down some of the top, most memorable weather stories of the year. I'm Rachel Schutzen alongside meteorologist Rhythm Reed. And Rhythm, let's jump right into this one. We take you back to Canada Day, where this beast of a tornado formed across Alberta. It really was a mesmerizing sight with wind speeds up to 275 kilometers an hour. It was officially categorized as an EF4 tornado. It was the strongest tornado Alberta has seen since 1987. Rhythm, what dynamics were in place that allowed this monster to twist and turn like that?
Well, we had all of the perfect layers and ingredients for those supercells to form. We had those temperatures in those high 20s into the low 30s, plenty of moisture. So we really got to see that cold front come in, bring all of these storms to fruition. And then we had a lot of upper level support from that high level shear as well, which helped to keep that long-lasting storm moving right through the area on Canada Day.
Wow. Now, 2023 will certainly be remembered for wildfires. It was the worst wildfire year Canada has ever seen, with over 15 million hectares of land burned. Now, the first headline that really went off was across Nova Scotia. The Tantallon wildfire is the largest wildfire that Nova Scotia has ever experienced. So, Rhythm, what allowed Nova Scotia to see this dramatic and catastrophic weather event this year?
Well, it was the drought, and it wasn't just the drought that we saw in spring, but also all the way back into winter as well. The low amount of snowfall during the month really led that drought to roll over into spring. And then right before the day that we had that Tantallon wildfire getting caught, we had the warmest day, or rather the 5th warmest day recorded in history for Halifax. So that heat wave really kicked things off.
Now, we all know Nova Scotia wasn't the only province that saw incredible wildfires. Ontario, Quebec, Alberta, British Columbia. We saw the evacuations long-lived in a place like Yellowknife. But BC, it did seem to take a lot of the headlines. It seemed to be endless when we talked about evacuations and new growing fires. Rhythm, why was BC such a highlight, such a memorable province for these fires this year?
It was the limited amount of precipitation that we saw in BC, not just during the beginning of the year, but all the way back into October of 2022. And that drought really rolled into spring. And then as we stepped into summer, we got that ridge building right across the west, bringing heat wave after heat wave that continued to cause that dryness right through the ground. And then we had an increase in the lightning as well, and we had a lot of dry lightning occur through the area, sparking so many more wildfires in BC than we've seen before.
And I know people are already concerned thinking into 2024 about what Canada's wildfire season will hold. That's just how much of an impression 2023 has left on people across the country. Now, from one extreme to the next, we go fires to floods, because Nova Scotia, while they did experience their largest wildfire on record, they also saw multiple devastating floods throughout this summer. How can that happen in the same season?
Well, for Nova Scotia, it's placed in such a place where you're going to get those cold shots during the winter, but also so much of that Gulf moisture moving up towards areas of Nova Scotia. And with climate change, we are looking at more moisture in the atmosphere for a prolonged period of time. So more hurricanes getting closer inland, as well as more of those remnants of tropical storms moving closer and closer to areas of Nova Scotia, really seeing a lot more of those extremes right through the area.
Dramatic swings in weather, that's for sure. Training thunderstorms are never a good thing. I want to leave you with this last shot. The Ottawa region seemed to be the new tornado alley of Canada, with multiple systems rolling through and tornado warnings going off this summer.
Our ongoing series, Year in Review, continues with Rachel Modestino and Chris Murphy, and here we're going to be talking about the Atlantic hurricane season. The season it was, Rachel, and first of all, let's get by the numbers.
Well, the numbers don't lie here. 2023, we saw 20 named storms, making this year top 4 for most named storms on record.
All right, now to put this in perspective, what's considered average?
Well, average is about 12 named storms for the year, so we can say that this year was above average, quite busy season, which is quite unusual because we were in a strong El Nino pattern. And typically, strong El Nino patterns, well, it leads to less hurricanes on the Atlantic side.
Yeah, the strong wind shear, that helps to disrupt the formation of hurricanes to get going. But there was a significant counter player involved in here that, well, let's talk about that.
Well, it was the record warm ocean waters of the Atlantic side, and they were definitely conflicting at times. Sometimes one would edge out the other.
Yeah, well, it's the sea surface temperatures, that warmth, that is the fuel to these tropical storms. All right, Rachel, what stood out to you about this past year?
Well, when we look at some of these storms, it has to be Brett and Cindy, first and foremost. Starting in June, with 2 named storms simultaneously is quite unusual, but it was the first time that 2 storms were developed in this main region.
Yeah, absolutely. We were calling these the troublesome twins, I remember, Brett and Cindy. All right, and then there was a bit of a lull, and then between August 20 and August 22nd, 4 storms flared up in about 39 hours. Very, very unusual, and one of them was Idalia, and that one certainly made an impression this year.
Oh, it definitely did. It struck Florida as a major hurricane, Category 3 strength. It was the first one to do so in this area, and it brought damaging winds all the way into the neighboring state of Georgia.
Yeah, and quite an impressive storm surge as well. So we went from there, and although Idalia certainly was damaging, it wasn't the most powerful storm of the season.
No, that one Canadians know all too well was Hurricane Lee. And when we talk about explosive development, this one is definitely the hurricane to watch because it developed from a Category 1 strength to Category 5 in just over a day.
135 kilometer per hour strengthening in 24 hours. So obviously that was explosive intensification. But then it fizzled out in terms of its peak strength. But Atlantic Canadians certainly know this was the one that impacted them the most.
It definitely did. I mean, you take all that Category 5 strength that's tightly wrapped up and then it just spread out and its wind field was massive, but less damaging. It made landfall in and around the Nova Scotia region with wind speeds 110 kilometers per hour. So we were definitely prepared for this one.
All right, so most of the storms actually stayed out to sea this year. So that certainly helped limit the damage because about $4 billion worth of damage was done from tropical storms this year. But last year, Rachel, 118 billion. Of course, this year we didn't have a Fiona, thank goodness. We didn't have an Ian. But when we look at this map and see how busy it is, just keep in mind that as each storm forms, the National Hurricane Center will put out these cones.
Yeah, the forecast cones. So as time goes on, they predict where a storm's going to go. And we took all of them for each tropical storm and named storm, and it comes up to a composite like this. So that is what you're looking at when you're seeing all these blue lines. And it's quite unusual. You can see a lot of the storms, like you said, Murph, tracked out to sea. But when we zoom into North America, the place that was in the most forecast cones was actually the Bay of Fundy, which is so unusual because you often think of active hurricane seasons down south in Florida.
All right, that's our year in review looking at the hurricanes.
Things have certainly escalated very drastically.
This is now officially the worst wildfire season in provincial history.
British Columbia taking the lion's share of the number of wildfires across the country.
Like most of our BC years in review, the focus is on wildfires. But 2023 hit different.
It was the most destructive and expensive season on record. With more than 3 million hectares burned in the province, it doubled the previous record set in 2018. Costing the province $770 million so far, but that number is expected to reach closer to $1 billion.
It's been unprecedented in way of the amount of area burned, the amount of fire on the landscape.
But the groundwork for the season was actually set back in October 2022.
People were enjoying, extended patio weather and extended golf seasons, but the forests were really lacking the regular rainfall that we typically see in the fall.
And as the drought continued in early spring, the fire started fast and furious. In fact, the province's largest wildfire, the Donnie Creek Fire, started on May 12th.
And that had many of our crews and, some of our senior fire officers that have 30, 35 years of wildfire under their belt raising their eyebrows.
And with below seasonal rain throughout the summer, there was no end in sight for drought conditions.
We have not experienced this level of widespread drought across the province this early in the year in recent memory.
2/3 of BC's water basins were at a drought level 4 or 5 by the end of July, the most extreme drought rating. No rain, plus lightning storms and strong winds, well, it was a recipe for disaster.
Thousands of Kelowna residents only had minutes to evacuate their homes.
The Weather Network was on scene in West Kelowna when the McDougall Creek wildfire forced a local state of emergency. Over 10,000 residents were evacuated, several structures lost, and more than 500 firefighters were needed to battle the blaze.
Looks like houses all around mine have gone down, and there's a hot spot 3 houses over from mine.
That same weekend, the province called for a state of emergency in order to get additional support to help fight the fires. And as the wildfire season slowly came to an end, bans were lifted and evacuees able to head home, firefighters already had their mindset on the 2024 wildfire season. And according to them, the outlook is already looking grim.
As we enter the winter season, El Nino is going to be at play. And what that does is it loads the cards in favor of a warm and a dry winter. And there's been a number of studies that have shown that fire seasons coming on the heels of El Nino winters are typically more active, more aggressive. It doesn't look great.
But they say at the end of the day, it will all depend on how much spring rain we get next year.
We've declared a provincial state of emergency to protect the safety, health, and welfare of Albertans.
Literally went from a black cloud a kilometer away to the fire was in our yard in guaranteed less than 5 minutes.
It got a little bigger, and then all of a sudden you're leaving and you were leaving now.
2023 saw more than 2.2 million hectares of forest burned in Alberta, while many of its communities saw their smokiest summers ever. It was a record year by many accounts, but while those impacts are still being assessed, for some, the focus is already shifting to 2024.
Absolutely, everybody is on edge.
Residents of Yellowhead County are feeling anxious. They were among the roughly 38,000 Albertans evacuated throughout the summer, many having to leave their homes more than once. County Mayor Wade Williams says that community is still rebuilding, not only physically after losing 36 homes, but mentally as well.
I never, ever, ever want to experience something that we went through. It was horrible, to say the least.
But fears are mounting that the conditions that fanned those flames in 2023 could repeat. A warmer, drier, earlier than normal spring that El Nino weather patterns make more likely than not to occur again. And if multiple large fires spring up simultaneously in early spring, Alberta could be in for another long haul.
But the real tell is going to be how much snow we get, how much snow sticks around, and the kind of precipitation we get in that window between, let's say, the back 2 weeks of March and through the month of April.
Alberta Wildfire says winter snowpack will be key in shaping next year's wildfire season, as will preventative measures like controlled burns should similar conditions arise. The province, meanwhile, plans to release the full cost of the season in the spring, but after extending firefighting hours, increasing surveillance, and dedicating $175 million in disaster relief alone, Albertans can expect a big bill.
Every direction we turned, we had more fires starting. It was a firefight I never want to see again.
All right, got some big hail here. Yeah, here we go. Ow. I'd say dime size to quarter size.
Storm chaser Mark Robinson has been chasing storms for years here at the Weather Network, but 2023 was particularly odd.
That's the first line through. Not as strong as I feared it might have been.
Quality versus quantity thing. We had a lot of tornadoes, a lot of thunderstorms, but they were all very messy, hard to see. I was right beside a tornado and literally did not see it.
I lost you.
As Mark faced storm chasing challenges across Ontario, the story took a turn from tornadoes to wildfire smoke. Canada may be seeing our worst wildfire season ever on record. Smoke traveled across the Canadian skies, impacting Ontario.
We woke up to the highest air quality health index we could give a region.
Could the smoke be linked to storm energy?
All the smoke
blowing to the east certainly is something that could cut down on the amount of heat from the sun getting down to the ground and being able to generate thunderstorms.
The smoke just killed off the energy for the storms.
There was a moment in 2023, you were in Ottawa, I was in Oshawa.
Yes.
And we were actually both reporting on the smoke.
The air quality here in Ottawa is just as awful, I think, as I've ever experienced. I remember driving out of Toronto when I was just north of Oshawa when I first started smelling the smoke.
You almost can taste it on your tongue. It's like soot on your tongue. Toronto and Ottawa had the worst air quality in the world at one point.
And it was so bad that I was looking across the river into Gatineau, and you literally couldn't see across the river, and I was standing on Parliament Hill.
I just remember the sky being completely orange at one point.
That week right then was just, everything was perfect to pump that smoke down into very populated areas. And I think that's what got everybody suddenly saying, oh my goodness, this happens, and you have to say, yeah, it happens every year, but normally that smoke is being sort of cranked out towards to Greenland.
It looked like there was a fireworks show going off for about 4 or 5 hours. House shaking, crystal rattling all night long. We got about 4 feet of water in our basement.
In a cruel twist of fate, all of the rain that Nova Scotians so desperately needed during the record-setting fire season came too late and all at once on a summer's evening on July 21st. It was the result of training thunderstorms which hovered over the province, dropping more than 250 millimeters of rain in areas hardest hit in 24 hours.
One of the biggest concerns was always, what if this happens in a city? And it just wasn't Halifax and the HRM, but it was a large area. This certainly, though, ranks as one of the highest impact flash floods in Canadian history.
The body of a 52-year-old Windsor man who had been reported missing was located by searchers in the primary search area.
4 people, including 2 6-year-old children, were killed after becoming stranded in vehicles due to rapidly rising water.
It's difficult to comprehend the magnitude of the tragedy and the loss that we're feeling.
The province reported 19 bridges needed minor repairs, while 29 bridges needed more extensive repairs as a result of the flooding. Another 7 bridges needed to be replaced. There were nearly 500 sections of damaged paved and gravel roads and 60 road shoulders that had to be quickly repaired by crews to keep traffic flowing, all a result of training thunderstorms.
The storms just keep coming, same place, same place, same place, for about 5 to 7 hours, and that's what did the damage in places like Bedford. And look at these totals. I mean, potentially over 300 millimeters. Even if we didn't measure that by a station, we're pretty confident there was well over 250 in some areas.
And that's a summer's worth of rain. That's a June, July, and August. That's tough to really wrap your head around these rainfall totals, and we can zoom right in to the Halifax region, and some of these totals are well over 200 millimeters.
We can rebuild roads and bridges and buildings, but we can't bring people back. And the legacy for these floods will be the incredibly tragic loss of life.
The helicopters here have been using the open road as a place to land and fuel up.
The biggest weather story of 2023 in Nova Scotia was a lack of rain in the early spring, which led to the most devastating wildfire season the province has ever seen.
And it's too dangerous.
More than 25,000 hectares of land were burned and over 200 homes destroyed. Over 150 of those homes burned on May 28th when a fire spread rapidly just outside Halifax in Tantallon.
Chief strategy to secure the perimeter of this fire was to bring in a large volume of heavy equipment and to dig down and scrape away the soil right down to mineral soil, so there's nothing left to build.
This happened simultaneously as homes were being lost to the Barrington Lake wildfire in Shelburne County. It came under control on June 13th, but not before burning 23,525 hectares, about 235 square kilometers. The largest fire Nova Scotia has ever seen. The low rainfall in the spring meant a low amount of moisture in the ground and in the trees. Forest Protections Manager Scott Tingley says the foliar moisture content of the trees is at its lowest around the end of May, just before the green-up, and last spring's low rainfall meant a low amount of moisture in the ground as well.
Extraordinary weather conditions, the spring dip, and then unfortunately we had ignitions, and we had very, very dry weather, for that week of kind of May 28th to early June. All those things lined up, unfortunately, this year.
Support was sent from all the Atlantic provinces with fixed-wing air bombers coming from Newfoundland and New Brunswick. A 17-person crew even came up from New England to help battle the blazes. The largest number of homes were lost in the Tantallon area shortly after the fire broke out.
It started basically in the residential area, So, there were homes involved in the fire very, very early on, within probably minutes. Most of the damage that occurred to homes and property was within about a 6 to 8 hour span of that first evening on May 28th.
It's not just the people, it's the animals as well.
During the evacuation, Lisa Parsons had to return on foot to her doggy daycare to evacuate 18 dogs.
And I ran through the bushes the whole way from Larry Utek to Pampered Paws Inn to then get the dogs.
Communities near the path of the Barrington Lake fire that were spared from the flames still had to contend with the smoke.
Air quality out there for the last several days has been unreal, horrible. It's like a snowstorm out there with the ash in the air. You can't see the sky.
A province-wide burn ban announced May 29th lasted until the fire was under control. Back in Tantallon, plans for new roads that would allow for alternate evacuation routes from the suburbs are now being discussed as a result of the devastating wildfires.
This is a special edition of Out of This World. I have in studio our space expert and science writer, Scott Sutherland. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, this is great.
And we're going to look back at some of the biggest stories of 2023 when it comes to our galaxy and beyond. Let's begin with NASA's Psyche.
Right.
Okay, this one is en route to a very unique asteroid.
Right. So the Psyche mission is going to Psyche the asteroid, which is in the asteroid belt.
NASA has a creativity problem.
They do. 220 kilometer wide asteroid that it could be, due to its high metal content, the exposed core and mantle of some ancient protoplanet that developed billions of years ago and then was smashed apart.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be a normal-ish rocky asteroid, but has a metal core that erupted onto the surface in these iron volcanoes and then cooled there. And once the Psyche mission arrives, it will be able to explore it and show us not only exactly what it is, but what we determine from it may actually tell us more about our own planet and our own planet's core, because we only know what we know about that due to indirect seismic data. We've never sampled it, we never touched the materials of the core, and the Psyche asteroid, Psyche mission being there, will be able to give us that information.
So we have to travel very far to find out what's happening here at home, potentially. Yeah. That's fascinating. Exactly. Now there's Lucy, the probe Lucy. So Lucy also looking at asteroids, but inadvertently, and I love when this happens, inadvertently discovered something really cool.
Yeah, on November 1st of this year, the Lucy spacecraft passed by an asteroid called Dinkinesh. And they thought they noticed something unusual going on with it when they were approaching, and it was confirmed they found a tiny moon orbiting around this asteroid. And but the real surprise came days later when they got the other images down from the spacecraft and saw that it wasn't just one moon, it was two.
Wow.
These two small, almost equally sized moons, so close together they're touching, a binary pair of asteroids' moons. And this is the very first time they've ever seen anything like this.
Incredible.
Yeah.
The James Webb Telescope sees all kinds of things we've never seen before, and most recently discovered something about Europa, which is Jupiter's moon.
Yeah, we've always had Europa is this tiny icy moon that's orbiting Jupiter, and it's been in science fiction that it may host life and all these other things, but what James Webb discovered was that there's carbon dioxide ice on the surface. And now we've always known that there's a subsurface ocean underneath the ice of Europa, and it's more voluminous by 2 or 3 times what we have in our Earth's oceans. But they've never, and they know it's salty, but they've never known whether anything could live there. Does it have the right materials in that environment to support the development of life and maybe the evolution of life as well? And this carbon was found to be coming from plumes coming out of this ocean. And so this raises the probability that we may find life on this tiny icy moon.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And quickly, Artemis 2 is going around the moon. They're
Right.
really interested in the South Pole.
Right.
So is India. They've already traveled there in 2023.
Yep.
Why? What's the big deal?
Water. There's ice trapped at the bottom of these perpetually shadowed craters, and that could be a resource for the future.
Okay, can't wait to see more on these stories in 2024. Thank you so much, Scott.